The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome everyone to today's hearing of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee on the posture of cyber operations and U.S. Cyber Command for fiscal year 2019. This hearing is the second of 3 cyber events today. This morning we heard from former Secretaries of Homeland Security Chertoff and Johnson, as well as former Cybercom Commander Keith Alexander. Adversaries such as China and Russia aggressively leverage and integrate cyber, information, and communications technologies for geopolitical and economic gain, and they do so in a seamless way. Dictatorships have those advantages, and their control over these technologies and information is as much about exerting control over their own populations as it is confronting free societies such as ours. As discussed in the Worldwide Threat Assessment for 2018 from the Director of National Intelligence, Iran and North Korea also continue to increase their offensive cyber capabilities and techniques. Over the last few years, both of these nations are believed to be behind cyber attacks that demonstrate not only a capability to deploy a variety of techniques and tools, but also a willingness to use cyber attacks as a means to achieve their national objectives. Needless to say, cyber threats today from state and non-state adversaries are real, pervasive, and growing. Cyberspace in the information domain writ large remains contested and under continual stress. We are no longer peerless, and cyber superiority is not assured. Yet while these adversaries continue to use cyber as a means to achieve strategic objectives, I remain concerned that we as a government do not have a strategy in place to mitigate, deter, or oppose their advances. It is safe to say that we have improved our military cyberspace and cyber warfare capabilities and also improved our resilience in many areas. But I am not sure the same can be said about the rest of our government, most notably the protection of our critical infrastructure that preserves our economic security and ensures our way of life. Further work is needed to build interagency partnerships to ensure a whole-of-government approach to countering the growing cyber threat. The Department of Defense plays an important role in this area, certainly when considering a significant cyber incident that may require their expertise during a time-sensitive emergency. From where I sit, a great deal of work remains to be done to improve our ability to defend, fight, and win in this critical domain, and also to improve and align our decision-making processes and operational authorities so that we are fast, agile, and relevant. Only then will our nation be prepared for the 21st century challenges we face. Our witnesses today are very well qualified to help us navigate these multidimensional challenges. Appearing before our subcommittee, we have Admiral Mike Rogers, Commander of U.S. Cyber Command and Director of the NSA, and the Honorable Kenneth Rapuano, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security and Principal Cyber Advisor for the Secretary of Defense. Thank you both for being here today. Admiral Rogers, this will be your last appearance before this subcommittee, and I want to extend my sincerest thanks and appreciation for your decades of service to our country and for the relationship that you have built with so many of our members on the House Armed Services Committee. We wish you great success in your next chapter and wish your family well. Thank you again for your service. I'd now like to recognize my friend and the ranking member, Jim Langevin, for his opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to your testimony. I've certainly been studying cybersecurity issues for over a decade, and I have to say I still learn something every day as the domain and the actors in it continue to evolve. Secretary Rapuano, it's good to see you once again. We certainly appreciated your testimony on counting weapons of mass destruction a few weeks ago, and I certainly look forward to today's testimony that you'll provide on cyber. And Admiral Rogers, it's a pleasure to have you back before us again today, and I want to thank you for your service to the nation. It's been many years that you and I have had the opportunity to interact, whether it's here on the HASC or my years on the HPSI, and it's been an honor to work with you. I'm just grateful for everything that you have done and all your contributions to better protecting our nation in cyberspace. I certainly wish you and your family well as you start the next chapter as well. 2018 is poised to be a notable year for U.S. Cyber Command. Following the legislative action out of this subcommittee over the past several years, Cybercom will be elevated to a new Unified Combatant Command after confirmation of the next commander. Additionally, A cyber posture review is being conducted for the first time, and a legislative framework is in place for notification of sensitive cyber operations. Cyber evaluations of major defense systems continue to be conducted to mitigate known vulnerabilities posing operational or other risk. Furthermore, cyber activities supporting named and contingency operations overseas have also matured, allowing the Department to leverage lessons learned when it comes to tactics, techniques, and procedures, as well as command and control of our forces. All teams of the Cyber Mission Force are expected to achieve full operational capability by the end of the year. These are all excellent steps forward, steps toward maintaining our superiority in an ever-changing domain. But though progress has been made, of course, these efforts and achievements do not mean we have reached the finish line. Instead, I would argue that we have just begun the race. In addition to reaching FOC, we must ensure that the CMF has the right people, continuous training and education, and the best capabilities in our toolbox to perform against any threats that may confront us. We must be able to measure the readiness of these teams, define the requirements against which they are being or may be employed, and have frameworks in place to rapidly employ them and enable them to respond when appropriate based on clear legal, policy, and operational authorities. Existing frameworks are too ambiguous to effectively, clearly, concisely, and consistently employ the CMF against all mission sets. Effective and comprehensive policies to deter and respond to adversarial actors, as well as efforts to shape international norms of state behavior, particularly regarding use of military cyber capabilities outside of a combat zone, are progressing more slowly than desired. As I said at the outset, this domain continues to evolve quickly, and it is simply not good enough to just keep up with our adversaries. Instead, we must set the pace. However, we must not compromise our morals and values when employing cyber forces, for those qualities are what set us apart from those who seek to do us harm. We must also avoid a cyber Cold War of sustained activities carried out by proxies or below the level of armed conflict. Instead, the U.S. must continue leading and crafting of sound domestic and international policies and laws for cyberspace and cyber warfare, working with our allies to assert and enforce rules of the road rather than letting malicious actors do it for us. With that, I'd like to once again thank our witnesses for being here. In particular, Admiral Rogers, I thank you again for your service and wish you well. And again, thank you for being here today to discuss such an important aspect of our military's capabilities. I strongly believe that each and every conflict we face in the future will contain some element of cyber, and as such, we must be prepared for all activities in the cyber domain. With that, I want to thank you all again, and Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Jim. I would also like to remind members that immediately following this open hearing, the subcommittee will reconvene right next door or upstairs for a closed classified roundtable with our witnesses. Before we move to our opening statements, I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's briefing. After all, subcommittee members have had the opportunity to ask questions. Is there objection? Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. Welcome again to our witnesses. Admiral Rogers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for your enduring support and the opportunity to talk to you today about the hardworking men and women of United States Cyber Command. On behalf of those hardworking men and women, I'm here to discuss the command's posture and describe how we prepare for and execute operations in the cyberspace domain to support the nation's defense against increasingly sophisticated and capable adversaries. The cyberspace domain that existed when we first established Cyber Command 8 years ago has evolved dramatically. Today, we face threats that have increased in sophistication, magnitude, intensity, velocity, and volume, threatening our vital national security interests and economic well-being. Russia and China, which we see as peer or near-peer competitors respectively in cyberspace, remain our greatest concern. But rogue nations like Iran and North Korea have growing capabilities and are using aggressive methods to conduct malicious cyberspace activities. Further, several states have mounted sustained campaigns against our cleared defense contractors to identify and steal key enabling technologies, capabilities, platforms, and systems. Our adversaries have grown more emboldened, conducting increasingly aggressive activities to extend their influence with limited fear of consequences. We must change our approaches and responses here if we are to change that dynamic. While the domain has evolved, Cyber Command's 3 mission areas endure. Our first priority is the defense of the Department of Defense Information Networks, or DOD. Second, we support other Joint Force commanders through the application of offensive cyber capabilities. And finally, when directed to do so by the President or the Secretary of Defense, we defend critical U.S. infrastructure against a range of significant cyber consequences in support of the Department of Homeland Security and others. In concert with the National Defense Strategy, we are charting a path to achieve and sustain cyberspace superiority, to deliver strategic and operational advantage, and generate increased options for combatant commanders and policymakers. Without cyberspace superiority on today's battlefield, risk to mission increases across all domains and endangers our security. Since my last update, Cyber Command has achieved a number of significant milestones. First, Joint Force Headquarters DOD, our subordinate headquarters responsible for securing, operating, and defending the department's complex IT infrastructure, has achieved full operational capability. Secondly, Joint Task Force Ares, our warfighting construct focused on the fight against ISIS, has successfully integrated cyberspace operations into the broader military campaign to defeat ISIS. And we will continue to pursue ISIS in support of the nation's objectives. Third, we have enhanced our training in cyber operations to prepare the battle space against our key adversaries. This year will bring several additional accomplishments. Cyber Command will be elevated to a unified combatant command. As a combatant command, we will have the unique responsibilities of being a Joint Force provider and a Joint Force trainer, responsible for providing mission-ready cyberspace operations forces to other combatant commanders and ensuring that joint cyber forces are trained to a high standard and remain interoperable. In addition, this month, we'll start moving in several hundred people into our new state-of-the-art integrated cyber center and joint operations center at Fort Meade. This will be our first fully integrated operations center that enhances a whole of government coordination and improves planning and operations against a range of growing cyber threats. And within this dynamic domain, it's imperative to continually evolve our training and our tools for our operators. We've recently delivered the first of several foundational toolkits enabling the Cyber Mission Force to work against adversary networks while reducing risk of exposure, as well as equipping JTF Ares with capabilities to disrupt ISIS's use of the internet. Innovation and rapid development demand competition and the ability to leverage all partners, including that of small businesses in the private sector. We intend to create an unclassified collaboration venue where businesses and academia can help tackle tough problems with us without needing to jump through clearance hurdles, which are often very difficult for some of them. Of course, all of our tools require a talented and sophisticated workforce to operate them. The Cyber Accepted Service, which Congress has helped create, will help us recruit, manage, and retain cyber expertise in a highly competitive talent market. Our success also hinges and remains entwined with continued integration of the Reserve and National Guard. In our headquarters, for example, we currently employ more than 300 full-time and part-time reservists. And in addition, Reserve and National Guard members are mobilized every day to lead and execute cyberspace operations. Perhaps most significantly in the coming year, we are nearing completion of the build-out of our Cyber Mission Force, with all of our teams on a glide path to reach full operational capability by the end of fiscal year 18. And in fact, we will achieve this goal ahead of time. And as the teams reach FOC, our focus is on shifting from beyond the build, i.e. creating this force, to ensuring that this force is ready to perform their mission and is optimized to sustain mission outcomes year after year after year. And I fully realize that cybersecurity is a national security issue that requires a whole-of-nation approach that brings together not only government departments like the DOD and other agencies, but also the private sector and our international partners. And over the last year, we've also increased our interaction with critical infrastructure elements within the private sector and the broader set of U.S. government partners supporting them. And as you know, I serve as both Commander of United States Cyber Command and the Director of the National Security Agency. This dual-hat appointment underpins the close partnership between these two organizations. The fiscal year 17 National Defense Authorization Act includes a provision that describes the conditions for any potential split of this dual-hat arrangement, and the Department is working its way through this question, and ultimately the Secretary, in conjunction with the Director of National Intelligence, will provide a recommendation as to the way ahead here to the President. All of us are proud of the roles we play in our nation's cyber efforts and are motivated to accomplish our assigned missions overseen by the Congress, particularly this committee. And finally, after serving, as you've already mentioned, after serving for over 4 years as the Commander of the United States Cyber Command, and after nearly 37 years of service in uniform, I'm set to retire later this spring. And as I do so, I'm grateful for the committee, excuse me, and its past and continued support, and its confidence in me and in the Cyber Command team. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary Rapuano.
Thank you, Chairman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and members of the committee. It's an honor to appear before you alongside Admiral Rogers, Commander of U.S. Cyber Command, to discuss the Department of Defense's priorities in cyberspace. In these roles, I oversee the development and implementation of the Department's cyber strategy and policy with regard to cyberspace, leading the Department's interagency cyber coordination efforts, advising the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary on cyberspace activities, and ensuring that the Department's cyber forces and capabilities are integrated across the joint force to support the missions assigned by the President and the Secretary of Defense. The Department's primary mission is to defend the United States and its interests. My focus from the outset has been on ensuring we are organizing, resourcing, and posturing ourselves to be ready to fight in and through cyberspace in a conflict with great power competitors. To that end, we have prioritized the 3 themes of the 2018 National Defense Strategy: increasing lethality, strengthening alliances, and reforming the Department's practices. The Department is pushing hard to ensure that we can deter aggression and outthink, outmaneuver, outpartner, and out-innovate our competitors and adversaries in cyberspace. 2018 will be a landmark year when U.S. Cyber Command will elevate to a unified combatant command, welcome a new commander, and complete the force generation phase of the Cyber Mission Force. DOD cyber forces are uniquely responsible for executing both offensive and defensive cyber operations, but national cybersecurity is inherently a team sport. Individuals, corporations, and organizations that own and operate critical networks must take appropriate steps to implement best practices in configuring connected devices and systems to mitigate known vulnerabilities, to harden the most critical networks, systems, and information, and to implement basic cyber hygiene and security measures. Cybersecurity experts estimate that some 90% of cyber attacks could be defeated by better implementation of better cyber hygiene practices and best practice sharing. Therefore, an essential element of cyber deterrence must be to minimize vulnerabilities that potential adversaries can exploit with significant effects. Through basic cyber hygiene and information sharing across the government and private sector, we can drastically decrease the opportunities for our adversaries to hold us at risk and the amount of time and resources we must spend responding to malicious cyber activity directed against us. We can then devote more capacity to developing and maintaining capabilities to hold our adversaries at risk. The Department is focused on preparations to defend the United States by halting or degrading strategic cyber attacks using cyber effects operations. We also seek to leverage the Department's extensive information collection mechanisms to provide timely indicators and warnings to public and private owners and operators. If a cyber attack of significant consequence should occur, the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, with other departments and agencies in support, would take the lead in responding to, recovering from, and investigating the different elements of a significant cyber incident. The DOD stands ready to provide additional support to DHS and other federal agencies upon request. The technical skills possessed by the Cyber Mission Force can augment our interagency partners when the magnitude of a cyber event calls for a collaborative government response. We are currently working with the Department of Homeland Security to determine the most effective and efficient ways for DOD to enhance our support to these efforts. We must always keep in mind that the capabilities of the Cyber Mission Force were developed and optimized for DOD's warfighting mission. Offensive operations are the means by which the military seizes and retains the initiative while maintaining freedom of action and achieving decisive results. If and when the nation faces a large-scale cyber attack, DOD cyber resources will be focused on and most effectively employed in our adversaries' networks, detecting, preventing, preempting, degrading, or defeating malicious cyber activities at their source, as well as holding at risk other critical equities and capabilities of the adversary. DOD cyber forces must also protect our networks and weapon systems against malicious cyber activity. The Department conducts network defensive operations every day in order to enhance our cyber resiliency. Defending DOD systems also requires identifying and mitigating our own vulnerabilities. We are moving forward to assess and redress major weapons platforms and critical infrastructure vulnerabilities as mandated by the NDAAs for fiscal years 2016 and 2017. As outlined in the National Defense Strategy, the Department's weight of effort must be directed toward preparedness for war. At all times, we must be ready to respond with both cyber and non-cyber capabilities to malicious cyber activity that results in loss of life, major damage to property, serious adverse foreign policy consequences, or serious economic impact to the United States. DOD must be prepared to compete and win in conflict below the threshold of conventional war as well. This is commonly referred to as the gray zone. Our adversaries are adept at calibrating their actions in both the physical and cyber domains so that no single event rises to the level that would merit a significant United States response. However, the cumulative effect of these actions can be significant. The Department's cyber forces must be prepared to respond to malicious cyber activity in the gray zone by preempting imminent malicious cyber operations, disrupting ongoing malicious cyber activities, supporting other agencies with our technical skills and capacity, and working with and through our allies and partners to apply diplomatic and economic pressure on these actors. I'm grateful for the support we have received from Congress. The hiring authorities you have provided us have been critical to creating the Cyber Accepted Service, and your generous resourcing of DOD cyber activities has allowed us to stand up the Cyber Mission Force and put U.S. Cyber Command on the path to elevation. The President's request for FY 2019 helps us sustain that momentum and continue to strengthen DOD's ability to operate in and through cyberspace. The request includes $8.6 billion for cyber-related activities and represents an increase of roughly $600 million over the FY 2018 budget request. In closing, I would like to thank the subcommittee members for your time and your assistance working alongside us to develop the cyber force the nation needs. The people in our cyber community are the best in the world, and I'm honored to serve with them. The Department is committed to approaching the development of our cyber capabilities with the sense of urgency warranted by the gravity of threats we face. Our strong relationship with Congress has been a critical component of our success and will remain vital as we continue our work to ensure that the Department's cyber forces are prepared to compete, deter, and win against any opponent. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for those opening remarks. I am going to stick to the 5 minutes aggressively to make sure we can get through all of our questions, but I gave you guys some flexibility. So my first question is, this morning we heard from former Secretaries Chertoff and Jay Johnson, as well as General Alexander, former commander of Cybercom, about the importance of continuing to improve interagency collaboration. And Assistant Secretary Rapuano, you just referenced in your opening statement how we're currently working with DHS to determine the best way forward in terms of what DOD's role is. What steps specifically are being taken by Cyber Command and DOD to build this more integrated whole-of-government approach? So not broadly that we're working on it, but what are the specific steps? I'll start with you, Assistant Secretary.
Thank you. First, I think it's useful to quickly just review our current activities in terms of working the interagency process. We chair 3 of the 6 federal centers associated with cyber and cybersecurity. I won't walk through them all, but the Defense Cybercrime Center, the Cyber Command Joint Ops Center, the JOC, and the National Operations Center that's run by NSA. And in all three of those centers, we're engaging with them on a routine basis, all of the key players in the interagency as well as industry with some of them to understand both the threats and the areas for collaboration and cooperation. We're also part of the NKIC, which the DHS runs at DHS in terms of coordinating interagency with critical infrastructure and other industry on response to specific cyber threats. So we have a very solid foundation in terms of relationship and understanding. The issue really is what specific types of capability and what thresholds of capacity other agencies would need in different types of circumstances. And then we need to assess that against what our warfighting requirements are and how do we do that balance.
Admiral Rogers.
So in addition to the individuals integrated from DHS, FBI, and other partners within my ops structure and my integration in their ops structure, if you will, series of specific exercises. We do 2 major exercises with our DHS and interagency teammates twice a year. I'm sorry, it's 2 exercises that occur 2 times total for the year. In addition, a series of tabletop exercises. You look at some of the things we have planned in the next 90 days, for example, we're going to be doing some election interaction at a tabletop kind of level with our DHS partners. The area that I am leaving, as you're aware, the area that I've talked to the team about, I really want us to get into next is let's get down to the actual center and sector level, because that's where it comes to the day-to-day execution. Guys, if we want to get to speed, we want to get to agility, because as operational commander, those are big to me. I want to get to speed and I want to get to agility to actually execute. Let's look at what we can do to actually perhaps integrate at that level. So that's kind of a future focus for us as I'm moving forward.
And I want to build on that. One of the statements this morning was the lack of a common operating picture impedes our ability to have this comprehensive cyber strategy. What do we do to address this lack of coherent operating picture?
For me, I apologize, Ken. First, it's a common operating picture of what? You want an operating picture of critical infrastructure? You want an operating picture of all of private infrastructure?
Well, that's part of the question is
Right.
What is the role of Cyber Command to drive those conversations? What is that interagency process? I think we need to have the answer to all of those.
So for me, my input would be the mission set that I'm directly responsible for within the broader DOD effort is the critical infrastructure piece. So I'm really interested. So how do we get to an integrated real-time picture that enables us to have an accurate sense of what is going on, that enables decision-making and helps to speed that decision-making? So that would be my recommendation for a kind of first focus, even though, as I acknowledge, that's not going to be DOD's lead here. We're in a supporting role, but I like to think we need to be part of this discussion and we can help.
So how do we spur that, though? I think the status quo is unsustainable. Obviously, we need to spur that interagency integration.
I appreciate that you're familiar with the national incident, cyber incident response framework, but that really does drive how we organize and operate within the federal government in terms of our engagement with industry and other players. And in the DHS role, in terms of the asset response piece, the FBI has the threat response piece, and then we have D&I, who's got the intelligence integration function.
Okay, I'm going to have to take the rest for the record. Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Elise, and I want to again thank our witnesses for being here today. Secretary Rapuano, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I believe that U.S. policy on Title X cyber operations needs to be advanced both domestically and internationally in order to effectively employ the force, deter adversarial actors, respond to adversarial cyber actors, and shape international norms for military use of cyber capabilities. So what actions are the Department and the Administration taking to advance the understanding of and the gaps in existing laws, authorities, and policies relating to cyber operations to develop standard frameworks and guidance?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As you all appreciate, the challenge associated with defining traditional military activities in the cyber domain is typically that is done by looking back historically at what are traditional types of military operations. In a domain that is so novel in many respects and for which we do not have the empirical data and experience associated with military operations per se, particularly outside zones of conflict, there are some relatively ambiguous areas associated with, well, what constitutes traditional military activities. This is something that we are looking at within the administration, and we've had a number of discussions with members and your staffs. So that is an area that we're looking at in terms of understanding what the trades are and what the implications are of changing the current definition, if that were deemed to be warranted.
Okay. Certainly something the committee is going to continue to provide rigorous oversight on and work with you as we develop. So how do you intend to defend forward, in quotes, as is outlined in the new command vision? Do you envision this defensive posture as using cybercom capabilities and intelligence to provide targeted assistance to national assets, including, for example, critical infrastructure, or would this involve Title X activities being used to disrupt platforms potentially before an operation actually begins?
So defending forward in the DOD context is really looking at the source of the cyber attacks or otherwise malevolent activities. And it's looking at how we can get at it, how we can uproot it, and also how we can hold other equities valued by the adversary perpetrating the act at risk. And with that, I'll just turn it to Admiral Rogers.
So the vision you outline is, my goal as a commander is to try to get ahead of problem sets before they occur. Therefore, I am interested in asking myself, within the authorities granted to me and within the broad legal framework that we use for the application of DOD capabilities, how can we attempt to forestall activity before it even happens? Failing that, how can we very quickly stop that activity before it has the time or the ability to generate significant impact, if you will, against our critical infrastructure? And so our strategy is about how do you tie, or vision is, how do you tie together the power of intelligence and the insights that generates with the operational capability that DOD has invested in the Cyber Command structure, in its mission force teams. And so that is our vision for the future. This capability that we've invested, that we've built, how do we use it in a way that attempts to forestall the opponent's ability to gain advantage in the first place, and failing that, how do we stop that activity before they're able to have significant impact?
I think it's important to be forward-leaning. I like the kind of the shift in focus, and I think the American people, quite frankly, expect that we will be more forward-leaning. Admiral Rogers and Secretary Rapuano, leveraging the lessons that we've learned to date is important to achieving success in the cyber domain, especially since we're learning as we go. We benefit, obviously, from every success and every failure. How are lessons learned from Cybercom's mission and operations being leveraged and instituted? And how is readiness being defined for the CMF? And how is this readiness being measured? How are training and recertification processes co-evolving with the threat and the technology landscape? We'll probably run out of time, but I like that for the record.
Yes, sir. So a lot of that question, very quickly. It doesn't matter if it's something we do offensively, if it's something we do defensively. Every time, part of our mission structure is post-event debrief analysis, lessons learned, and then how do we tie this into what we're doing next? So there's a cumulative impact here, which as a commander, I really like.
You'll have to take the rest for the record.
Okay, got it.
Got to move along. Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thanks, Admiral Rogers and Secretary Rapuano. I'm concerned, as is the subcommittee and the entire committee, about the lack of any cyber strategy. We haven't seen anything from the administration, despite the fact that we've made requests for it in the NDAA last year. And I wonder if you could shed some light on why that is, why there is no strategy, number one, and number two, how we can be in a position, in light of the threats we're facing, in light of the action that we're seeing, the active measures by our adversaries, to be engaged in any sort of effort to defend or to act offensively without understanding what the overall mission and goals and objectives are in the absence of a strategy. And I guess I would go to you first, Secretary Rapuano.
Thank you. I think one of the reasons is it's very hard. There are a lot of evolving dynamics at play, and we still have a relatively new administration, and there are competing views as to what the right trade space is associated with a variety of equities and risks. That said, it is at the White House, the National Cyber Strategy, and I understand that it should be forthcoming in the near future. We're looking to then enhance our cyber posture approach, which we'll be providing by August, to sync with that national strategy. DOD is one key member of the whole of government, and we want to make sure that we are very thoughtful in terms of very synthesized integration with the national approach.
And I would only add, I don't think you should feel for 1 minute that that means the DOD, for example, has stood pat and done nothing. We've got a national security strategy and a national defense strategy in which cyber is a component. As the operational commander, I've tried to take that broad strategic vision, and as Representative Langevin has articulated, I've laid out in writing to my team, here's kind of the vision I think that we need to be building to that reflects that broader strategic underpinning, even as I acknowledge we have not yet completed a specific cyber strategy, although that work is, we think, getting close. So I would only, please don't think that we're just standing still waiting for someone to tell us, you know, what we can do.
No, I appreciate that. I was not under any illusions that you were just standing still, and appreciate very much the work you've done. We want to be helpful, but I think it's also absolutely incumbent upon this administration, in light of this threat, to provide some guidance. And precisely, Secretary Rapuano, as you said, it is hard, but it's hard because we're in a whole new world, and our adversaries, in fact, are moving forward, and the lack of ability for us on our part to say, look, this is what we've got to deal with, this is how we're going to operate, this is what we've got to guard against. And frankly, both in a public and classified setting, being able to say to our adversaries, these are the kinds of things that will result in a response from us, and laying that out so we've got a much more effective deterrent policy in place is something that I think we as a subcommittee have got tremendous oversight obligations in looking at it, and the administration itself. Now we've seen significant turnover at the NSC. I see just news reports now that Nadia Shadlow has resigned. Obviously, Mr. Bossert has moved on. We can't let those add to the amount of time that is going to be dedicated now or taken up in putting this strategy together. So it's something we'll continue to work on in a way so we can ensure that the nation is, in fact, got a strategy in place to deal with one of the most important and dangerous threats we face. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield my time to Representative Murphy.
Ms. Murphy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Admiral Rogers and Mr. Rapuano, for being here. I'm encouraged that the department is making progress on fielding the persistent cyber training environment, which is, as you know, the training platform that allows cyber forces to train in simulated network environments. I represent Orlando, which is home to Army's Program Executive Office for Simulation Training and Instrumentation, or PEO STRI. PEO STRI was tapped to develop and acquire the PCTE, which will also incorporate the work of the National Cyber Range in Orlando. In your view, what do you think the value of a persistent cyber training environment is for readiness? What kinds of individual and collective training objectives do you think it can support? And then as you look into the future, what sorts of capabilities and infrastructure do you foresee these PCTEs requiring?
So for me, Cyber Command, we're the ones who articulated the operational requirement, because my vision, our vision, if you will, is I want to be able to, wherever our cyber forces are garrisoned or stationed. We started early on in this process, large exercises brought together literally 1,000 individuals, teams from across our force. Those are all good things. But when I said to myself, look at the time it takes to build this network, look at the money it costs to do this, while this should be a component of our training strategy, this does not scale for a day-to-day effort. And we need a day-to-day capability that you can train in garrison, where defensively I can create I can mirror my own networks. I can simulate an opposing force attempting to penetrate the network, and I can use my defensive techniques to train against it. Likewise, I can use this. I want to build this over time so I can bring my allies into this, so it's not just us, it's our broader international partners. Because if it's expensive for us, imagine what it is with some of the work we're doing with nations spread around the world in cyber right now, trying to get them to bring their entire team structure to the United States. This is also good for me because I want to be able to create network structures that from an offensive standpoint, I can model, so how am I going to penetrate this? What actions might the defensive team take? I can use offensive and defensive capability together in head-to-head scenarios where, quite frankly, they're each trying to get the better of the other. Never underestimate the positive impact of competition and a little head-to-head contest to keep teams motivated. So those are all examples of why I think PCT is so important for us, because that goes to the ability to retain readiness and the ability to be ready now, not, well, if you give me 3 months, if you give me 4 months, whatever. We can't work that way.
You just mentioned the idea of integrating allies and partners into training together. What do you think? Where do you think there are some opportunities for enhanced training and security cooperation activities in this space? And then, do you have some examples of allies and partners where this is already happening that are maybe benchmarks or best practices for how we can move forward?
So I haven't. Most of our international partners, quite frankly, are in the same place we are. They see a need, they see a requirement. They don't yet have in place the long-term solution that they would like. There's 3 or 4 off the top of my head where I've actually sat down with them and said, hey, walk me through your system. Can I see what you do? We participate in some foreign exercises as well. It isn't just everybody comes to us. I want to learn from others. We participate in foreign cyber exercises. But I think the ability to, particularly for our key, the Five Eyes and a handful of other nations where we are just part of an ongoing coalition in cyber, if you will, focused on both the defensive side and in some cases the offensive side. The ability to put together an integrated training structure where, again, I can have their units in garrison, we can model the exact terrain that we think we're going to be dealing with live. That's going to be so impactful for our ability to actually execute mission.
Yeah. And do you envision that as you run these exercises and identify vulnerabilities, whether it's in platforms that are ours or allies and partners and their networks, that you'll be able to
then I turn it
around and get it to the folks who are building that so that they can address them?
Yep, that's part of the idea here.
Great. And then you stated in your testimony that Cybercom is working to synchronize cyber planning and operations across the entire joint force, and that Cybercom is helping the combatant commands improve command and control by establishing integrated planning elements at each COCOM. Can you provide a little more detail on exactly how Cybercom is standing up, is it COIPEs?
COIPEs, yes.
At each COCOM?
So there's 9 other COCOMs besides us. We become the 10th one, effective with the new commander being confirmed and assuming the duties. I thought one of the biggest shortfalls we had was I thought we did a great job with the Cyber Mission Force in creating a higher headquarters in the form of Cyber Command. But if you truly want to integrate cyber into the breadth of operations across this department, then you've got to integrate this capability at all the COCOMs. And so
Admiral Rogers will have to take the rest for the record. It was a good question. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Admiral, you mentioned authorities a little earlier. What would Cybercom require to move from a defensive support posture to an active deterrence posture where you were actually hunting and denying malicious operators before they inflicted damage?
So for right now, if you look at day-to-day authority that's currently granted to the commander of Cyber Command, on the defensive side, I feel very good that I have the authorities that I need to defend the DOD networks. One of the questions I think we need to ask ourselves is, for example, with the defense industrial base, or if DOD's role is going to be to partner in defending critical infrastructure, what level of ability to operate outside the DOD would be appropriate for the Cyber Mission Force? I think that's a good conversation for us to have, because right now, again, not a criticism, an observation. Right now, the current construct, I don't operate outside the DOD. So I would suggest we ought to take a look at that. On the offensive side, I feel very comfortable about the authorities that we have currently put in place to apply cyber in areas of designated hostility, the Syrias, the Iraqs, the Afghanistan of the world. And we are doing operations there almost every day. The area where I think we still need to get to a little more speed and agility, and as Mr. Rapuano has indicated, it's an area that's currently under review right now. We're working our way through is what is the level of comfort in applying those capabilities outside of designated areas of hostility, and how could we potentially speed that up? I don't believe that anybody should grant Cyber Command or Admiral Rogers a blank ticket to do whatever they want. That is not appropriate. The part I'm trying to figure out is what is an appropriate balance to ensure that the broader set of stakeholders here have a voice in what we do, but at the same time, we empower our capabilities with speed and agility to actually have meaningful impact. And I think that's what we're trying to work our way through right now.
And so that brings me to the next question, which deals with the Guard, and as they establish cyber units. I know you said you had 300 full and part-time working with you right now at U.S. Cybercom. These units, I mean, they'll not only be supportive of their home states, but I assume that we would want them to have the authority to be supportive of other states as well.
A lot of it depends on, first of all, I am the son of a guardsman. So I grew up, my father was in the Illinois Guard for 27 years. So as a kid, so I feel very strongly about the value of the Guard. I have lived this personally, and I saw the difference my father made when he served. The challenge, I think, is how do we view this as an integrated whole? So one of the points I make to the Guard and I make to the governors when they ask me this question. Remember, we're all competing for the same manpower pool, if you will. There's only so many people out there with the requisite skills and kind of background. So be leery of doing solution sets where we try to replicate, for example, 50 different independent capabilities across every single state. It's how do we synchronize this? The other point I try to make is remember, cyber doesn't recognize geography. So I'm a resident of the state of Illinois. And if you're trying to protect infrastructure in Illinois, the challenge might be that much of that infrastructure physically doesn't even reside in Illinois. It's the way that the digital backbone has been built. So Title 32 and the Guard's employment outside of Title 10 is all based on legal authority that also has a key geography component. You're acting in a Title 32 capacity within your state. What do we do when the cyber infrastructure that you're trying to defend or impact doesn't reside in that physical location? So my only argument is we need to work our way through this, and we need to think more broadly and in a more integrated approach. So I don't think it's only Guard and Reserve. Likewise, I don't think it's only active. We've got to get across the spectrum, and we've got to ask ourselves, whatever we create, how do we do it in a way that maximizes its ability to be employed in potentially multiple different scenarios, not just a scenario, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it's complex, and the city of Atlanta, as you know, was subject to a ransomware attack, and I can see that. I mean, I think the SamSam ransomware has been around for 8 years now. I mean, I can see this as we talk about infrastructure. It's not just going to be attacks on DOD and on U.S. government operations. It's going to be attacking state operations and city operations, and I quite honestly don't care where the person comes from that stops the attack, nor do I think any other government official would. And just we'll need help with how we draft that language for you. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time.
Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to use the rest of my time to let you finish that question because you were talking about, that it needs to be integrated into the COCOMs.
Right.
But as you finish that, also, if you can talk to me a little bit about how J5 will integrate with these co-IPEs and whether or not they have you have both the manpower and the capacity to and a solid handle on the cybercom plans in order to make sure that they're synchronized.
Right. So one component was we've got to get knowledge and experience at the COCOM level on how you plan and execute cyber operations. Secondly, that capability has to be able to be integrated, not just within that particular COCOM, Honolulu, Stuttgart, Tampa, fill in the blank, but it's also got to tie back to Cyber Command so that we've got one integrated approach to how we're doing business here, particularly since the majority, all of the offensive capability within the department, for example, remains under my Cyber Command's operational control. We apply it in support of the other combatant commanders. So we've got to tie this together. We are starting the build in 18. It's going to be finished by 23, so it's a 5-year build out. We'll have IOC at all 9 projected by the end of 19, so by the end of the next fiscal year. That gets an initial operating capability to all of the other 9 combatant commanders, and then we'll flesh it out over the course of the next 3 years. A couple of COCOMs are a little further than others, and we're using this kind of a test case then. I highlight, and no disrespect to any, but I highlight PACOM and CENTCOM, probably the 2 where at the moment we've started to get the initial investments, and because of some of the broader activity in their theaters that are of high interest, that are bringing our cyber capability to bear, along with a lot of other capabilities, we've kind of decided to use them as a bit of a test case, if you will.
Great. And I guess, are you going to be also providing the training and resources to help people have the cyber fluency to be able to engage, even if that's not their primary mission?
So part of this is we'll help develop this training standards for every one of the billets. This is also a good example of how once, with each service having created a core cyber competency, one of my visions is, so you could do one tour at a combatant commander, you could do another tour in one of our mission teams, you could do another tour at Cyber Command, you could do another tour in ASD, in cyber policy, you could go to the Joint Staff and do cyber work. One of the values of this professionalization that as a department we've put in place now is that we'll get recurring benefit by moving people, so we don't have to train so it's the first time you've ever done this. We don't want to go through that every time. There's always a first time, but I don't want to have to do that every time if I can avoid it.
Great, thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Mr. Garamendi. That concludes the open portion of this session. We are now going to move to 2337. I also want to just let the members know we're going to have a quarterly cyber briefing, so if there are questions you have we didn't get to today, that will be scheduled in the coming week. So with that, this is gavelled out, and we'll hustle upstairs.